Hello, my name is April and welcome to this short video on research in collaboration with the Clark County School District, CCSD. This video will be divided in three parts. Part 1, where to start. Part 2, the research application manual. And Part 3, the application process itself. Jumping straight into it, Part 1, where do we start? So the starting point for the process is very simple. We just need to go to the RC Division website, AARSI. The RC Division website is where we start essentially. At the very top, we'll see a series of links to many different resources. What we're looking for is the research link. Clicking on the research link, within the research page, as we scroll down, we'll find a series of links at the bottom. The next step for us is to click on the research review process. Even if our project includes data requests, we still need to go through the research review process, so that is where we start. Clicking on research review process, we will go into the research review process page. That page already offers a series of resources to us, but my suggestion would be that you can scroll down that page and find the link to the Research Review Procedures Manual. The Research Review Procedures Manual will have all the information we need to know before we even start the application process. We will review the Research Review Procedures Manual together on part 2 of our video. Part 2, the Research Application Manual. The Research Application Manual can be found in the Research Review Process page. When we scroll down under the Resources section, we will see a link to the Research Review Procedures Manual. Clicking there, we will have access to the full manual, which is great because we can use things like find functions to find specific points that we might be looking for in the middle of our application. I highlighted a few points in the manual. We will not go through everything together in this video, so I highly recommend that you can go through the entirety of the manual before you start the application process. So for our highlights today, what we're going to look at are just some very relevant points that jump the eyes as we skim through. For example, in the definition of research, CCSD will remind us that projects that are relying solely on publicly available data without interacting with those affiliated with CCSD do not need to go through the application process. Another big question that comes up is about fingerprinting and badging. That is only required for those who will have unsupervised contact with students. That is a very rare condition that shouldn't happen and almost never happens, and it's also up to the researcher to make sure that that supervision is in place. So all this is really telling you as a proposer is that you have to talk to your collaborators and make sure that the supervision is in place so that you don't need fingerprinting and badging. Scrolling down, we'll see a few other interesting points. It will mention more about the application process itself. We will go into the application process in a second, but the big question comes up about how long does the process take, especially when you're submitting a grant proposal, a sponsor research proposal. Deadlines are coming and you don't have much time. So how long does the process take? Off the bat, CCSD mentions to us that no two projects are the same. And yes, in fact, every research project is a case-by-case basis, but they mentioned that if you have everything together, it could take up to 2-3 weeks to complete the entire process. So to go more into this, at the very end of the video, I prepared an exercise for us so that we can review the specificities of our project and create a very good estimate of how long it will take for us to get everything that we need to complete this approval process before the submission of our grant proposal. Then the manual explains the application process itself and explains that it starts with Part A, a letter of intent, and then it goes to Part B, a description of the study. The letter of intent is just an initial application part where we just give them a little bit of information and we align our project to the CCSD focus points. They will give us a link to the focus plan, and we can navigate through the website, look at the information, find the points from the focus plan that match with our research project, and add to our application. Other points that are interesting in this review, in this initial review, is that they will be looking really in detail into the scope of our project. They really want to see the feasibility aspect being well thought by the proposer. They want to know that whoever is proposing the research project has a very realistic kind of sense of what needs to happen for the research to be successful, and for every participant at every level, every collaborator, to go through the project in the best possible way. So this idea of scope is a big point of review for the review committee at CCSD. So I would highly recommend you to think very practically about the needs of your research project when applying, so that you can explain to the committee very well in very fine detail how exactly the procedures of your research project are going to happen, and how exactly they influence the lives of all those involved. So that is a big point I would recommend keeping in mind during this initial stage of application. And then, of course, if the letter is approved, they will invite you to send a full description of your study. And just as a note as well, something that jumps out is that CCSD might have their own specificities when it comes to requirements regarding research involving human subjects. Maybe you are used to going through IRB processes in different institutions. In CCSD, for example, they require active consent and assent for all research involving human subjects. That means that even for projects that are exempt or projects that would need, just a quick consent, CCSD will still need the assent section to proceed with the approval. So for these different kinds of requests, my suggestion is that we can have patience and pay attention to what are the needs of CCSD specifically, and just simply deliver to them what they need. There's no point trying to convince CCSD that in other institutions things were done differently, for example, right? So this is the kind of approach that I would suggest proposers having, just to look at what are the requirements and deliver as required. Then it will go into reminding us about sponsorship and facility acknowledgement letters. The sponsor is, for example, a person at director or higher level who is confirming that the study is of interest to the CCSD, and the letter of acknowledgement has to come from a principal or a facility manager at the school or site. These are very important documents that I would highly recommend you to prioritize and look for at the very, very early stages of your process of applying for collaboration with CCSD. The fees that they mentioned, they only happen in the full description. In the letter of intent, you will not have a fee. Then, of course, they'll go through the review process. Once your research is approved, they have a process that they call the check-ins. It happens at least once a year. Every year at the end of June, projects expire, and you have to go through the check-in process just to renew, just to make sure nothing has changed. And if you do have changes, that's also a check-in process where you check in with them and you discuss the modifications you want to make, and then you adjust your project, renew your project, and move forward. For the manual, this is essentially it, and provided that everything has gone well, you can have multiple projects going on with CCSD at the same time. So in part 3 of the video, we will look at the application process itself. Part 3, the application process. The application process is found at the very top of the research review process page. We will find a link to the research application and release of student information system. When we click that link, we are taken to the application process. Now, please note that you will need to create an account with CCSD to have access to this system. The account creation process is very simple, takes about 2 minutes to complete, does not require any documentation, just a quick email confirmation, and it's done. Once we are logged in, we will notice that at this top section, we will find a lot of useful information. Some of it might be present in the manual. However, it's still important to read the entirety of the manual before going through this process. We will find links here to the focus plan, for example, and also a link to the manual. So these are handy links that we can use if we want to double check something during our application. To start the application process, we scroll down a little more. At the very top, we'll find a button to submit a new application. When we click on it, it will take us to the system where we actually fill in the fields and send in our application. The fields that they have are fields that we would expect from this kind of application. Things like the project title, the submitter organization, definitions of problem and research, questions and hypotheses, connections between your research project and the focus plan, details about the personnel, what are the benefits to the district, and supporting documentation as well that can be uploaded at the end. Once we are done with this, then we can finally submit for review. If we're not yet done, we still have a save for later button, but if we are, then we click submit for review. However, this idea of saving for later and the idea of doing it in small parts, this is something that I think it's important to discuss with you, with us proposers, before we start the application process, because it involves estimating the time that we need to complete this process. These are a few tips that can help us estimate how much time it will take for us to complete the entirety of the process. A first point is to identify our approval needs, meaning who needs to sign off on our project. To do that, it's important to understand in our design how many sites are we going to be present in, how many collaborators do we have, how many students, do we need parents, everything that might be part of our design that might involve some form of approval prior to CCSD completing the review. It's important for us to think about that and try to deliver that to CCSD at the very first moment when we are applying for the approval. Then realistically estimating how long it will take for people to complete the approval or the collaboration forms. People have complex lives that might affect how long it might take for them to literally just sign a document or sign a letter. I have seen cases, and it might sound like a simple example and a silly example, but I have seen cases where people were literally on vacation and couldn't sign the letter on time. And I've seen proposers having to try to contact these people on vacation to get the letter signed. So this, as straightforward as it may seem, they might be used to it, they might have done it a few times, it's still something to triple check at the beginning of the process to understand their availability and how long they would take to complete this. Another point that is important is to understand that CCSD is a large district with a very large amount of incoming requests, and they might have waves of incoming requests that might make their process a little slower at times. This is important to keep in mind. Also, to optimize your approach to the submission to avoid doing it part by part, imagining that every time you have to do a little bit, you're going to have to go into a new wave of approvals through CCSD. So it's better if you can organize yourself to do it all at once if you can. And then, of course, understand that many requests are not really up to CCSD to complete. They are mostly up to the proposer, up to the PI. Hence, the time is mostly in the hands of the proposer to make things happen pretty quickly. So understand what CCSD needs and then rush on your side of things to make sure that the process can be as fast as possible. And then, even if the project or personnel participating has affiliation with CCSD, it is still necessary that everyone in the project and every project comply with the guidelines and requirements. So you can't, for example, just communicate with your collaborator in CCSD, who might be even a director level person in CCSD, and get his sort of email confirmation or verbal confirmation, and just move forward with that. That is not acceptable. Even if they are collaborating with you, they would give you a letter of collaboration, but you would still need to go through the formal research review process, as we are seeing here. And then some very final tips. It really comes down to project management points when trying to go through this process as fast as possible. Some tips that came to my mind: first, list all your requirements from the start. When you're drafting your project and you're designing your project, try to make a list of everything that will happen that you think might require a special review by the CCSD review board, and highlight that to them during the letter of intent already. Tell them how many sites you're going to have, how many collaborators, points that you feel might be important for them to review. Add everything there. Don't think about it later. Don't add a few and then think about it. Just do the entire thing so you can optimize their time and move through this process as fast as possible. The next point is to communicate with your CCSD collaborators for these site approvals and those director level approvals early on in the process. As soon as you have your design, as soon as you have something to tell them, basically, go to them, try to start that process of collaboration and getting those letters as soon as possible. Then understand CCSD peculiarities, like, for example, differentiated IRB requirements. Just understand that those may be in place, and instead of trying to convince CCSD that in other institutions things were done differently, just try to understand what CCSD requires and just comply with that and deliver what they need. That will be a lot faster for the process as well. So when you're submitting a grant, you really should prioritize this process to, one of the first things, even before you have a budget meeting or something like that, where you start finalizing your project, you should already have started the CCSD approval process as one of the first steps when you're submitting a grant proposal. Then contact the RC division, AARSI, the RC division, as soon as possible, sooner than later. If you have questions, just bring them out to them as soon as possible. Don't wait until the end. Don't try to estimate. Don't try to guess what they would say. These types of processes, they benefit from clarity as soon as these questions may come up. So if you are not sure if you need a letter for this, if you're not sure if you need special approval for that, if you're not sure if you need fingerprinting or badging, even though you've read all of the manual, ask those questions, send them your examples, let them know what you have in mind as soon as possible. And then, of course, anytime in the process, you can contact ORSP. Our team here is always ready to help you, and we can also articulate details with the team at CCSD, help you with your collaborators in CCSD and in other institutions, and other documentation, other aspects of your grant proposal that you might need assistance with. We can jump in and work together as a team with you in that submission. So I hope this video was useful, and I wish you a successful application process with CCSD.